It is a wonderful privilege to be with you this morning. This has been my spiritual home for almost my entire Christian life. And it's a privilege to get to share with you this morning. I came here for my junior year in college. I transferred from a junior college and from UC Irvine. A transfer student, only 2.5 years old as a Christian. And I retired here as a professor 50 years later. What an incredible privilege it is to see this as my spiritual home. And my wife, Lynne, is here with us today. We've been married 52 years. She said not to let any of you know that she's here. But this has been our spiritual home together for 52 years. And it's a great privilege to finish off the chapel year with the topic Sola Gratia, grace alone. That's been your focus all year long. My message comes from the wonderful benediction that the Apostle Peter concludes with his first epistle. And the key verse is chapter 5, verse 12. By Silvanus, a faithful brother as I regard him, I have written briefly to you, exhorting and declaring that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. 10 times in this brief letter, Peter refers to grace, dispelling false notions surrounding grace and declaring what is the true grace of God. And his exhortation is upon standing firm. This is one of the most powerful messages that we could receive as Peter nears the end of his life. Peter knew a lot about standing firm in the grace of God. Peter's experience with Jesus during Jesus' earthly ministry was anything but standing firm. I've charted just a bit of Peter's experience. Most of this comes from the Gospel of Matthew. Peter's experiences are what we might say up and down. If you look at the bottom, you'll see events in Peter's life. Along the right side, it says whether it's positive or negative. Peter is a bit up and down. What are some of the reasons for the defeats? First of all, Jesus says, thinking human thoughts, not God's. Pride, willfulness, fear, presumption. But after his tragic, heartbreaking denial of Jesus, Peter experienced the true grace of God, which, in addition to being a gift, is enablement. Notice what happens with Peter's experience with the risen Jesus. He's still up and down. You are all going to be up and down. But Peter has learned to stand firm in the grace of God, and he's experiencing what it means to establish stability. And he ends his life on a high note. The intriguing feature is that after Jesus is risen, Peter is learning to stand firm in the true grace of God. And his letters spell that out. To stand firm in the true grace of God is to trust God, the one who found you and saved you, to draw upon the presence of Jesus, to live in the power of the indwelling Spirit of God, and to trust the plan of the Father who loved you even before you were created. And what is the true grace of God in which we stand firm? Initially, the grace of God, as we know, is the gift of salvation apart from any of our own effort. It is undeserved favor. We also understand grace to be the enablement that God gives us to accomplish anything to which he has called us to be and to do. We can all be at the top of our game once in a while. But it takes standing firm in the true grace of God consistently to be fully faithful to Jesus. Peter has several aspects of the true grace of God in this epistle in which we are to stand firm, and we're going to look just briefly at three of them. First, stand firm in humility. Peter says, clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. On the way to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had this interaction with Peter and the 12. Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered." Peter answered him, "Though all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter said to him, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." A false message of grace promotes elitism, which produces arrogance, cockiness, and pride. Arrogance, cockiness, and pride are counterfeits of appropriate confidence. Whether it's done intentionally or unintentionally, arrogant people make others feel less important. Humble people work to build others up. And God's grace is a gift of humility that enables us to do so. As was mentioned earlier, one of my life mottos focuses on humility. Take God's calling upon your life with deadly seriousness. The lives of the world are in our hands. We need to take that seriously. But don't take yourself too seriously, because if God can talk through a donkey, he can talk through me. A second area for us to stand firm in the true grace of God is when enduring undeserved suffering. Peter says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world." Some suffering is a consequence for our own sinful and wrong choices. It's our fault. It's our stuff. But some suffering is undeserved and a consequence of the world being fallen and under the influence of Satan's evil work. The devil will do anything he can to get us to think humanly instead of thinking the things of God. An illustration of this is in Jesus' first prediction of his suffering and crucifixion. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. And here he comes, my man. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this will never happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Jesus' suffering was undeserved and unthinkable from a human standpoint. But his suffering served an immense purpose for the plan of God, the salvation of our souls. We also will endure undeserved suffering because we are part of God's purposes in this world, and we will face opposition from the devil just simply because we're on God's side. A false message of grace says that suffering comes only upon those who deserve it, the weak and the sinful. But know what Peter said earlier. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if, when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you might follow in his steps. A third aspect of standing firm in the true grace of God is while awaiting eternal glory. Peter says, "And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be the dominion forever and ever." But notice what Peter had endured. At that fateful moment, Jesus said, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you." Wow. "That he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail." When you're in the middle of that suffering that will come, Jesus is there even though you are being sifted. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. It is the grace of God that sustains us throughout this life with all its pain and joy and ushers us into eternal glory. A false message of grace says that our faith extends only to salvation. But the true grace of God extends from here to glory. Another of my life mottos focuses on living rightly until glory. Live as though Jesus is coming back tonight to take us to glory. Plan as though he's not coming back for 100 years. Over the years, I have taken great comfort in the life of the Apostle Peter. Do we have a clock? How am I doing for time? Okay. Hang with me. I've done a lot of work with Peter. As great a man as he really was no different than us, with his ups and downs, and seeing the impact the grace of God had in his life. As with Peter and all of us, I stand here by grace alone. 55 years ago, I returned from fighting in the war in Vietnam. I was with the 173rd Airborne Infantry Brigade and saw almost constant combat for a year. I went to Vietnam, a cocky, belligerent, very pagan 19-year-old. I came back from Vietnam a lost soul, a very disturbed 20-year-old. My wife would later say that I was an old man in a young man's body. I was isolated, angry, and totally out of sync with culture. I started into college but really didn't fit because our culture was fractured in its debates about the war. I did not fit. I went deeply into drugs and was slowly spiraling into despair. But about a year after I returned, God began sending messengers of grace into my life. It was an absolutely crazy time. Now my hair was long. I was driving an old Volkswagen van. But God kept sending messengers of grace into my life. One time I was driving my van down Pacific Coast Highway to my home on the Central Coast in Pismo Beach. As I was getting onto the highway in San Luis Obispo, there standing on the on-ramp were two guys holding a sign and hitchhiking. That was very common in those days, and they were typical with long hair and beards and backpacks. What was unusual, though, was the sign that one of them was holding. It had written on it simply, heaven. I thought that was odd, but I pulled over and rolled down the window and said to them, I'm not going to heaven, but I'm going to Pismo. You want to ride? They just nodded, and one of them said, you ought to think about heaven. I jumped out of the van and ran around to open the door to the back seats. But as I ran around the back and got to where they were standing, no one was there. I looked around the van. I looked underneath it. I looked in the bushes on the side, but no one was there. I just stood there for a minute, absolutely stunned. Not stoned, stunned. And then just got back in the van and drove to Pismo alone. Now, I really have no idea what that was all about, but it really shook me up. Later, some Christian friends said that maybe they were angels. I had no idea, but I do know now that it was a message from God, a message of grace. I wasn't a believer. I didn't believe in heaven or hell, but God was beginning to get my attention. I had gone through some very difficult times in my now young 21 years, and I had come to the place where there had to be something else than where I was headed. After several months of God sending messages of grace through a variety of voices, I was invited to a Campus Crusade Christmas college retreat at Arrowhead Springs. For a week, I lived in my van and then went in and listened to speakers talk about Jesus and amazing grace. And on New Year's Eve, at the final message for the week, I responded to the grace of God and gave my life to Jesus. There's a van now with Jesus stickers. Well, I was never the same. I put down on drugs that day and never smoked dope or did any other drugs to this day. The grace of God in Jesus had given me new life. And 50 plus years later, I can exhort and declare, along with the Apostle Peter, that the true grace of God extends to every area of our lives, not just Christian stuff, not just church stuff. It's every area of our lives, enabling us to grow in the image and likeness of Jesus in all that we are and all that we do. And I can give you confidence that your professors and the staff here at Biola, along with the Apostle Peter, that this is what it means to stand firm. I really do wish God's greatest blessing on you. And I pray that you will give yourself to stand firm in the true grace of God with all that you are for all of your life.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.